So I think one thing we need to say is that we can argue against this, because this is the argument about how if they get to be more like us, meaning more engineers, more doctors, more all kinds of skilled people, if their endowments, as we call it, are going to be very similar to ours, if they get to be like us, the kinds of things we produce, their prices will fall. Therefore, we're going to be hurt. That is a standard argument. But now we have a different theory, which is that if you produce, if you get more similar, you produce also similar products, but they're not the same products. So if you walk down Madison Avenue, which is just over there, and you look at the number of men's shops and the women's fashions, they're all cheek by jowl. They're all producing different varieties. So we have trade in variety now. So they're producing in the same so-called industry, but they're in different niches. And they have to be innovative. Armani has to be continuously coming up with new styles to be able to compete with Calvin Klein or with Kenzo and so on and so forth. So that is where, so as we get more similar, we also have more trade in similar goods, but not the same goods. Not the same goods. So that's sometimes we call variety, trade in variety. And some of my students actually have calculated this as something amounting to trillions of dollars worth of gain for the developed countries, which are more similar to each other. So today, if you go and ask people, was US right in economic terms in putting Europe and Japan back on their feet after the war, nobody's going to really say that was a bad idea. But they were competitors with us. So we need to have the same perspective on educating people, that we, in fact, everybody will tend to be better off. So I think that is one thing I would just add to the online thing, because I think it has such enormous promise for the developing countries that we have to be able to meet this objection, which is bound to arise, because people are just scared of competition from the developing countries. And anybody who goes ahead and trains them and educates them, you're going to get into a lot of trouble if you can't manage to contribute. Now, let me come then to the United States, for example. Just the last, and then I'll stop. In the US, we have this problem, which is the lack of use of technology like online in our own, in the way we teach. So let me give one example. An average sort of top-line professor probably earns, with the perks and so on. I should guess, I'm guessing because I don't, I come from a bazaar culture, where we are supposed to be bargaining in the market. But I find it bizarre to negotiate my salary. I just take whatever I'm given. But I think other people are getting even more than I do because I just never bargain. And so what you have is something like $300,000 for an annual salary for a very good professor. You're asked to teach 3 courses. So you have $100,000 per course. Then the college says, at least one course has to be no more than 15 students. So if it was in Oxford or Cambridge where I studied, it would be one-on-one, right? Which can be terrible because you've got a lousy tutor. It's like hell, being sentenced to hell. But with 15 people, of whom 7 don't turn up, it's a very expensive way to do it. And this is where we are not using technology at all. I mean, we use things like that instead of blackboards, and that's about it, most of us. So this is an old-fashioned idea where we're denying ourselves scale economies, as we call it in economics. That creates such a high cost of education. And the effect of that on the poor and whose wages have been stagnating is quite enormous, because they can't afford these tuitions. And nobody has enough money to be able to afford the tuition for them through scholarships. So you have a real problem with lack of technology. Now, if you actually were to use the technology, you can actually have interactive technology. You can really, have a class of even 300 for that matter. It does mean management, but you can have interaction, and you can really, in fact, today's students also, let me just say, I never cut classes, and in 45 years I've cut only 10, and I like students. They can walk in and out, but increasingly I've noticed they don't want to come in and out. They want to do it by emails and so on. So the unique advantage you had when you were taught by Professor Bhagwati has disappeared in a way, because they're not interested in that face-to-face contact. The way we used to get a thrill when a big guy, you could walk into his office and then discuss things with him. So I think we are not really using the interactive technology at all internally, and that is causing high tuition, right? And it is affecting the poor, because I'm combining it with the fact that wages have stagnated, right? Therefore, the poor don't have access to the kinds of, education which we otherwise would be able to afford. And as doubtless Dr. Davis knows, if you go outside of the Ivy League and also of the private colleges, the public sector also, there's no money now. I mean, it's being increasingly cut. So many states are now, as you know, are trying to raise tuition. But as soon as you raise tuition, even from 10,000 or 7,000 by 30% or something, that automatically rules out a few of the poor. So I think today's problem with capitalism in a way is that you have first a lot of excess in the EXCESS by the rich who are getting quite rich. So they're not like the Simon Schama's Dutch burghers who accumulated money but spent it on good causes and never had ostentatious consumption. Instead, you see a lot of ostentatious consumption. And you see that in magazines like Financial Times, how to spend it. In the main text, it's sort of, it goes after the rich. But when it comes to, running magazines, you have how to spend it and so on. So everybody is into ostentation, how to display your wealth and so on in many cases. So I say we have to reduce excess in the EX sense and increase excess in the ACC sense, all right, to education. These are the only ways in which we could actually really make capitalism today viable, because otherwise, it's going to be very problematic. So I've been writing about that, and I think this is where online is something I've been thinking about. So that's why I accepted coming here, because I see that we're deliberately, not that it will solve the problem, but it will certainly make a big dent if we can creatively put our resources together, among the people who really know the technology and can work with it, and try and really use that to make it possible for a whole lot of people to access education, which otherwise remains very expensive, extremely expensive. So we have a Professor Baumol in economics who used to argue, I don't know what he called it actually, but he said that manufacturing had a lot of technical change. So the wages would tend to go up there. But if you went into the service sector, and he had in mind haircuts, the wage of your barber and so on, or your hair salon, and that goes up. And so that then crowds out the non-traded sector of services. But here is a case where we are actually denying, we have technological change possible, and we are not using it. So that's where I would like to end, because I see this as a very important tool for both getting to the developing countries in a very substantial way at a relatively lower cost than would be possible if they had to build up all kinds of, send people here and so on and so forth. And you could never again access the best talent. Today you can access the best talent in the world, and really get it going. And the reverse flow also is possible. If you want to find out about the trade in the Gangetic Delta in the 14th century, I doubt if there's anybody in this country who would be lecturing on that online. It would be a reverse flow from there to the India specialists around here. So there are lots of local knowledge things which could be coming this way. And once they grow up, then they will also be like us here, you know. And then so I think it's a very interesting prospect of interaction, the kind of serendipity you get from this interaction. You see that in physical movement in Silicon Valley. Because the Silicon Valley guys go back to India and then come back here. So there's a kind of synergy of interaction. But that can be done online through this cold technology is sometimes cold, but it can become quite hot.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
That's it.